Hey guys. So after Paul's trial before Agrippa and Festus, Acts 27 begins by saying, "And when it was decided that we should set sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius." And again, Luke inserting himself saying we should sail. "And embarking in a ship of Andromitium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica." And this is really important. We actually had a mention of Aristarchus before this, during the riot in Ephesus in Acts 19. I believe it's verse 28 or 29, when they're screaming out, "Great is Artemis of Ephesus." And Aristarchus is one of the people who is dragged out amidst the crowd. And so he had really faced some serious difficulty already in his journeys with Paul. And yet here he is faithfully serving. A name that we don't very often hear, Aristarchus. And yet I'm reminded of 2 Kings, I believe 2 Kings chapter 8, where we have the prophet, the son of the prophet sent by Elisha to anoint Jehu. And we're talking like God is using someone to do something incredible, literally changing the nation of Israel, anointing a new king. And yet it was just a faithful servant of God to do what God had called him to do. And in this case, it's Aristarchus accompanying Paul amidst a perilous journey. And so it's something that we can look at and appreciate, that God calls even the ones who are lesser known, like you and me, people who can just serve God faithfully. But the next day, we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. You get the sense that as we close the book of Acts in these last two chapters, Luke has a lot more detail about the things that he was there for. And you get the sense that he really knows about boats. I'll just say that. We get that sense from this chapter. And so putting out to the sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra and Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. And we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty to Cnidus. Even saying like, yeah, it was a difficult journey we were on. Just recounting it on his own. It's incredible. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone, coasting along it with difficulty. We came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was over, that was the Day of Atonement, Paul advised to them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of cargo in the ship, but also of our lives." And we get the sense that we don't have any indication that this is supernatural revelation. 2 Corinthians, I believe it's chapter 11, Paul explains that by this time in Acts, before being on this boat, he had already been shipwrecked 3 times. He had traveled some 3,500 miles or something over sea. So he was very familiar with ships at this point because he was faithful to serve God and go wherever he was sent, even if it meant thousands of miles of sea travel in a time where travel was difficult and dangerous. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said, which honestly you can't blame him. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. And since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, that is, it was really cloudy and stormy to the point you couldn't even see them, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Luke You try arguing that Luke was not here. Like, let's just take a step back. Luke is not just a good historian and thorough in his explanations, but you can also tell he knew exactly what was going on in that boat to be able to account it like this. Like, I know it's a lot of little details, a lot of things that are less important to us application-wise, but let's appreciate how thorough Luke is as a historian and how clear it is that he was there for it. He knew the general sense of how things were going. Like, we should be able to appreciate that as people looking, at least apologetically. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all, those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I've been told, but we must run aground on some island.'" And we know that God, even in the midst of the storm, is there. It's beautiful. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little farther on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. There'd be about 90 feet, 120 for the first one. A little farther on, they took it, and fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. So these soldiers began to listen to Paul. They got the sense of, oh, wait, we should have listened to him before. This man has God on his side. We're going to take a risk and cut away our only hope of an emergency exit. And so they had faith in Paul, trusting in him and what he had said, and even knowing, like, hey, without these men, you can't be saved. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day. You've continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food. It will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. And we were in all 276 persons in the ship. And that's a lot of people. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach, but striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, specifically wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. And he ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to the land. And that is a lot of information. A little bit less application outside of being a faithful servant, even when we're unknown. But let's just acknowledge the chronology, the presence of Luke is so obvious. The faithfulness to faithfully explain and to chronicle what had occurred for us to look back on and see even God's work in the midst of what could be seen as, oh man, this horrible event that happened. We were terrified. We almost died. And yet Luke is here chronicling it for us, so that we know that Paul heard the voice of God, that these people eventually came to understand that Paul was correct, even taking away their escape routes, knowing that the only one true way is Jesus Christ.